Welcome back to a chilling night of horror stories. These are some more tales from a rural police officer. Ever since childhood, I'd been interested in M.C. Escher and his works of amazing art. The way he made two-dimensional shapes and drawings blend into three-dimensional appearance. It always fascinated the ever-loving fuck out of me. I couldn't help but to smile when looking at any of his work, or most related to it. So, in 1981, when flyers depicting impossible shapes and figures started to litter our streets, I noticed. These flyers were printed out on colored paper using the common dot matrix printers of the era. There was never a number or name, no excuse for these flyers. They depicted impossible shapes and figures that seemed to threaten to jump from the page directly into your eyes. They stared innocent enough at first. A few impossible triangle shapes, maybe some stairs that twist into nothing shit like that. After a couple days, things started to get darker. The new flyers were a mixture of Escher and Poe, as in Edgar Allan Poe et al. Instead of staircases and triangles, it was now headstones and open graves. Everything had eyes. The eyes seemed to move and blink if you moved the paper just right. People in town were starting to talk and worry and talk some more. Things got a little comical at times, with theories ranging from a deranged serial killer to ads for an upcoming restaurant. Of course, nobody actually knew what they were. See, small towns across the country have one thing in common, gossiped I. Not every citizen had seen the flyers yet, as some areas were more remote. In fact, it looked like someone would just dump a load of flyers and let the wind deliver them. It was about 5 days in when the flyers got even more disturbing and even hostile. To look at these images for long seemed to drive folks temporarily crazy as balls. To this day, I can picture those fucking flyers. At first, there's nothing really there, just shapes and lines and dots. Like the much later magic eye things, if you gazed at the images just right, you could see the hidden pictures. Up to this point, all of the flyers released at one time would be printed on the same color paper and had the exact same design. This time things were vastly different. Blue sheets depicted some sort of animal, feasting on a flayed open corpse. Yellow sheets revealed some type of thing erupting from a man's back. Green sheets, those were the ones that got to me. They depicted children eating from a dead body or a woman. The red sheets, they showed something that appeared to be Satan. Half man, half goat, with twisted horns, a long spade-tipped tail, and a forked tongue. This round of flyers triggered numerous calls flooding into the 911 dispatch center, located in the basement of the courthouse. At least 200 people called in, some even going as far as to walk 3 miles to a payphone just to call and report those vile flyers. That is what spurred my boss into making me point on the investigation. This would be my first trip to the rodeo of Detective Hood. It was both a big honor and giant fuck you to me, because if I could actually solve this, or at least peg the sick bastard distributing the flyers, it would cement my career. If I failed, however, it would kill it. I started my investigation by looking for patterns of where and the flyers showed up. I noticed the flyers would be distributed early mornings, before sunup, on days with strong early morning winds. That told me the perp was intelligent, and had a way to accurately predict the high winds. It also showed the locations I thought to be drop points. A peak above the town, a ridge behind the town, and even high hills in people's farms. Anywhere with a higher elevation than the town square. That explained why some folks had never seen a flyer. They were in valleys, and to the other side of the town. I decided to hop in the car and go to the nearest drop point. I didn't use lights or sirens because I didn't think the course of the investigation was an emergency. When I finally arrived on the top of Reynolds Point, I was greeted with an awful sight indeed. There was what appeared to be a crude altar constructed of rocks, twigs, and tanned skins from deer and squirrels. Upon the small flat rock in the middle of the altar was the corpse of a mountain cat, a small breed of mountain lion dead. It had been killed and dissected with haste, as if someone was hurriedly looking for something inside this poor animal's body. Its intestines coiled beside its head. The stomach had been flipped inside out and was now holding the poor thing's penis and testicles. In place of its missing eyes, 2 chunks of amber, each holding a small lizard-looking thing inside. I called out for the evidence collection team to clean the mess up as I drove to next expected drop spot. I drove to Madlands Ridge with lights on, and my foot in the throat of my interceptor. I used to love the sound those things made when the 4-barrel would open and the engine could really stretch its legs. I was driving fast, too fast honestly, when I approached the Ridge access road. I almost didn't make the turn, but stupidity was strong with his one that day. I flew up that road, now using the siren, and as I was about to slow down to pull off the road at the hiking trail, a gigantic black dog, bigger than any dog I had ever seen, charged from the forest directly towards my car. I slammed the brakes, attempting to not murder someone's pet, but could not slow the massive 4-door cruiser in time. I watched as the creature's face distorted into something unimaginable, just as the front bumper rammed through its body. There was no thud, no dents, no blood. It wasn't really there. I stopped the boat of a car in the middle of the road and just sat there, looking around while the lights and sirens continued to run. I was shaken from my stupor when the radio crackled to life. The evidence team had found the altar. They were not happy, but had no choice but to collect everything. I finally managed to steer the car over to the wide spot so I could park and hike my fat ass up the little hill to the flat-lined ridge line. As I climbed the hill, I noticed darker spots in the soil and splotches of reddish-black fluid on the fallen leaves. That nervous feeling in my stomach started to increase to an almost intolerable level. I could feel something in my bones, and I knew I would find something terrible on that hill. I expected another altar, complete with a mutilated animal corpse. I was right, but oh so wrong. As I neared the top of the hill, I could see the circle of field stones surrounding the makeshift altar. Upon the altar, a body all right, but not a fucking woodland animal, like I expected. The body was human. A small child, naked and mutilated. Insides torn out and strewn about the altar. Poor kid's head wasn't there. Neither were her fingers or the soles of her feet. The bastard took everything we could use to get an ID. Now I was pissed. I called the dispatch to have Irene turn out the coroner and let the evidence crew know they had more work up here too. Later that day, I would find 3 more altars, each topped with a different form of a body. Deer, sheep, coyote, then the poor mountain cat and the child. Each location was documented, cleaned, removed, and reconstructed in the basement of the jail. That was where we did our recreations. It took us a while to figure this next bit out, actually too long. It was 3 days later when I finally decided to put thumbtacks in the county map to designate each altar. That's when it became apparent. The fucking altars were arranged in a pentagram. That fact cemented the idea of Satanism into our minds. Hell, if it had not been for the child's body, we would have collectively shrugged the entire thing off as a prank by some sick-ass fucking teenagers. We would never had thought it was what it turned out to be. During the next week, we talked to more than 100 people, the biggest majority of which were clueless to what we asked. There are a few that we managed to find out were into drugs, but no Satan worship. That is until we discovered a little woman by the name of Gina Paisley, a self-proclaimed white witch turned dark master of magic. Magic being spelled with a K, of course, eye roll. Tina was nervous when confronted with pictures of the animals. I saved the child's body for last, to help me gauge her involvement incrementally. When I slid that picture from the folder and placed it on the table in front of her, she went nuts. She jumped onto the chair she was seated in and starts to pull large handfuls of hair from her head as she screamed, "No, not like that. You called wrong. He was wrong. We are all going to die if he isn't stopped." My sergeant and I exchanged worried glances as a deputy restrained her and cuffed her to the table. When she finally calmed herself a bit, we continued to question her. During the questioning, which lasted 11 hours due to her mental breakdowns, we discovered her and her son had been trying to summon a demon to do their, and I quote, dirty work we can't without going to prison. It took us an additional hour and a half to find the son. When we kicked the door of his trailer home in, he was standing behind the little Lawson girl. Poor little Amy was tied to a chair, with with a gag in her mouth and a blindfold on her head. That was all she was wearing. I shot before I thought. I saw the knife in his hand and I saw him move that hand towards the girl. I turned his head into a jackass lantern. We searched the home after releasing the terrified child, and me giving her my jacket and button shirt to wear till the ambulance arrived. We a few dozen books of summoning rituals, all in Latin. We had to send the books to the University of Kentucky to be translated. We also found 2 more children tied up in the spare bedroom, drugged and asleep. The guy had taken them from a few towns over to avoid raising suspicion. We found his journal. In it, he wrote of how he wanted to summon his dark lord and give himself wholly to said beast. Most of the spiral-bound book was different written fantasies in which the devil would sexually assault the writer, sometimes with force, most often by the guy's own choice. He talked about how the world was not good enough to house him and his mother, who he admitted to being in a sexual relationship with, and having had a child by her as well. He then talks about how that baby was sacrificed to Satan on its 666th day of life. That was what started his quest to raise Satan. Gina was charged with complicity to kidnapping, complicity to murder, cruelty to animals, desecration of a corpse, tampering with physical evidence, and even with the incest. She was sentenced to 98 years and a day by the Honorable Judge T. Lawson. We never found the computers that printed the papers. Hell, the Paisleys neither one owned a computer nor a printer. We did, however, receive an anonymous letter claiming to have been responsible for the flyers, saying they knew those 2 were up to some sick shit and knew if the pictures got bad enough, we would investigate. We never saw another Twisted Escher want to be. Sorry that this one was longer, folks. I am also sorry it took me this long to finish it. That case brings a tear whenever I remember it. I mourn for not only the child, but for the parents of that child, being out there, knowing your child is gone, but not where, why, or even if she was alive. If they read this, please forgive me. I tried to get, and I did, even a few years ago, went so far as to pay for a DNA testing. However, the blood was too degraded. Same with marrow. I tried to bring your family closure. I am sorry. In this one, I was still the rookie, and as such I caught the shit cases. The calls placed by crazies, or senile folks that imagined an intruder with multiple heads. Those were the calls that the more seasoned officers had grown tired of. The first dozen or 2 of these calls I rolled to were in fact false. They were the result of old age, mental illness, wild imaginations, and paranoid youngsters that hear a thump while home alone. All were perfectly understandable and easily diffused. Then there was this case. Like I said, I was still a rookie, wet behind the ears, so to say. It was in early spring of '68, maybe April or May, not entirely sure on that. I do know that it had been unusually warm for the time of year. I had been assigned the night shift, 12 to 12, simply because my boss was a dick, and I made a pass at his daughter. Really fucked him up when I later invited him to our wedding. Anyway, I was chugging truck stop coffee and dumping handfuls of no-dose pills just to be awake for my shift. I was parked on the side of the main stretch of an interstate leading towards our little hamlet. I was just swallowing a new handful of caffeine pills with a slug of nuclear hell-hot coffee from the little truck stop near my current stopping place when the radio decided to kick on. I nearly choked on my pills and spit coffee onto the steering wheel as I tried to answer the call. Car 78, what's your 20? Over. Dispatch, this car 78. I'm at the local truck stop parked watching for violations. Over. Car 78, we need you to roll code 3 to the address not far from my current location for a possible domestic disturbance with malice and intent. Subject is possibly armed with a handgun. Victim is one Mrs. Tina Edmonton, 24 years old. Roger that. I hit the lights and sirens to make the 10-minute trip a little quicker. About 200 yards from the driveway, I killed the sirens, but left the lights on to semi-announce my presence. As I pulled into the drive, I immediately noticed that both vehicles were in the yard, rather than the driveway. As I parked my cruiser, I started to notice some strange things right away. I felt like something was watching me, something big, and whatever it was not friendly. I also had every one of the hairs on my arms standing straight up, along with the little hairs on the back of my neck. I could feel something else too, something I can only describe as a buzzing or vibrating deep inside of my body, like how your hands feel after hours of weed eating, but over my entire body. For a moment, it was actually a pleasant feeling. Then it started to intensify until it felt an electric current traveling across every inch of skin. It eventually faded into a dull feeling, like being covered by walking flies. I managed to push all of this down to a manageable level, and even managed to convince myself the way I felt was due to caffeine overdose. I laid my left hand upon the trip of my service weapon, as my thumb undid the leather strap securing the piece to the holster. Hand on firearm, I approached the open door. Things were silent, not supernatural silent, but quiet enough I could hear my own heart beat. As I approached the door, I called out and identified myself. "Hello, redacted County Sheriff's Department. I need to speak with you." "Hello, if you do not respond, I will enter the premises and search for you." I ascended the broken and crumbling cement steps to the front door. Standing at the open doorway, it was obvious that a bad fight had happened. Furniture was strewn about, tables tipped over, a couch overturned with the side split by some type of sharp blade. The carpet was even cut up and rolled back in a few places. Dishes were shattered and laying everywhere. The place was truly in shambles. However, there were no bloodstains or other signs of any injuries. Straining to hear, hoping to hear signs of life from the wife or even movement of the husband, I again announced myself. "Hello, police. I need you to come out." I made my way through the home, careful to not step on any evidence, and found the guest bedroom first. It looked much the living room and kitchen, mattress sliced open, drawers pulled out and contents scattered about. In my rookie brain, it was obvious someone had been looking for something they really wanted. As I made my way to the master bedroom, I started to hear something, an intermittent plop noise every few seconds. Again, I announced myself. "County Sheriff's Department. I need you to step out here now, or I will come in, and you will go to jail today. Come out now, and maybe we can talk this whole thing out." I lied. I was already pissed, and someone was already going to jail that day. As I turned the doorknob for the bedroom, I could have sworn I heard something shuffle in the room. I quietly and slowly turned the knob before kicking the door open, weapon drawn. As I entered the room, the source of the plopping noise, Mr. Edmonton was on the ceiling, his body completely destroyed. Flesh was hanging off in strips, allowing blood to drain and drip in pools and puddles under the body. His head was oddly off, and it took me far longer than I want to admit to discover that it was turned around backwards. His chest was facing the floor, while his face was on the ceiling. I could not see what was affixing the body to the ceiling, and I didn't have a lot of time to absorb my surroundings. As I was looking at the body of the deceased, I again heard a soft shuffling sound. This time I was able to determine the location of the source of the sound. It was coming from the shut closet doors. Again I announced myself. "Police, come out now with your hands up, and in plain sight, come out on your own. Don't make this more difficult than it has to be," I stated. I listened closely and could distinctly hear a small shuffle. Then, what sounded like 3 or 4 deadbolt locks being opened one at a time. I quickly rushed the door, tearing the doors open with my weapon raised. I was met with an empty closet. Large, walk-in type closet, but still an empty fucking closet. I know I heard something moving from inside the closet, but the clothing hanging there were all stationary. Everyone knows when you touch something hanging in a closet, it sways for a while. I pushed the clothing aside and inspected the back wall. It was a solid white wall, but it was cold to the touch. Much colder than what it was that day. I was running my hand down the wall when a loud crash occurred from the direction of the kitchen. I turned to rush out that way, and as I did, I felt this cold breeze blow over me. It was like standing in front of an industrial freezer blowing sub-zero air. I shivered a bit and stepped out of the closet. As I crossed the threshold from closet to bedroom, I was overcome with a feeling of intense vertigo. The world was swirling around me, twisting and turning. For a moment there, I thought I saw a young woman, that would have matches the description of the wife, walking through the wall and out the side of the house. Again, I shrugged this all off as an overdose in shitty coffee and stay-awake pills. I walked from the bedroom, down the short hall, to the kitchen. In the kitchen, which had been absolutely in a mess when I arrived, stood a young girl, maybe 10 or 11. The kitchen was clean. The living room was perfect and clean. As I turned around to attempt to gather my head, I saw the yard. There were no vehicles out there other than mine. I turned back to address the child. "Hey, sweetie, what's your—" She was gone. I closed my eyes to calm myself as I was absolutely shitting peachlets at this point. And when I opened them just a couple of seconds later, I was standing in the middle of a burned-out house. There was nothing there, and honestly, I was afraid I would fall through the floor. I made my way to the cruiser, the whole time having a fucking fit of every imaginable emotion. I slumped into the driver's seat, looking at burns out husk of a home. From the looks, it had been burned for quite a while. In fact, there was a small tree growing through the roof in or near the master bedroom closet. Now, pissed off, I keyed my radio, only to find it non-functional. I tried my portable, but it would not work either. I took a few deep breaths and finished the cup of coffee I had left on the console. I just backed out of the driveway and turned to leave. My radio crackled to life just the moment the tires hit the road. "Car 78, what's your 20? Over?" "Dispatch, this is 78. You know where you sent a while ago. I'm just now leaving." "Car 78, I haven't spoken to you all night. I've been trying to contact you for almost 2 hours now. I was about to send patrol out looking." "Over." "Dispatch, you called me out to the Edmonton place for a domestic disturbance. When I got there, it was burned down?" "Yeah, no shit, 78. It burned back in 59. Mrs. Edmonton had been getting beaten and, well, come to the station, we can talk about it. I was wondering when you would get the call." "Over." I made my way to the station and tried to settle my nerves. Before I got to town, I smelled the strong smell of something burning. I looked out the side windows and didn't see anything. When I glanced to the rear view, I screamed and slammed the brakes, sliding all over the road. When I came to a complete stop, I leapt from the car and peered in the back window, at the empty seat. But I know for a fact there was a burned corpse in the back seat. I made my way to the station, where I would have a long chat with Irene. The short of it is this: Mr. E had beaten the ever-loving shit out of his wife multiple times. She had taken it and never once complained. That is, until a beating caused her to miscarry. When she healed from that one, she slipped her hubby some strong sleeping pills, and when he was out, she gutted him. She then set the house on fire, with his body inside before vanishing into thin air. Nobody could explain how the tiny woman managed to drive 10-penny nails into her dead husband while he was against the ceiling. When the fire was finally put out, they found him charred and nailed to the ceiling. They never found the wife, and honestly nobody was looking to arrest her for the murder of that bastard. The few people that did try to find her did so because they were worried about her. Each of them would end the effort after 3 or 4 days, and simply told people that she must not want to be found. The smell of burning corpse lingered in my cruiser for weeks. I was the only one that could smell it. Apparently that was what happened. Every rookie would get that call once. Every one of them would be tormented by that smell. Each had a slightly different experience at the house, but enough alike to match up. Anytime I burn my dinner, I remember that moment in the car. God help me, that fucking smell. It is unforgettable. Anyway, for today's last tale from a rural police officer, I shall recount a case that I had, until very recently, forgotten about. I had blocked these memories and was happy to never think of them. That is, until a commenter mentioned a trip to a cemetery. I remembered the time I was forced to clean some teenagers out of the cast iron fence that surrounds a local cemetery. And so, without delay, let us begin. It was my very first case as a solo operating patrol officer. The year was 1966, and it was April the 24th. I had just finished my training, as well as the 3 months of riding with a senior officer. I was young, dumb, and entirely too eager to be a solo policeman. It had always been my dream to be a cop, and I had just achieved my lifelong dream. I had just been given my first cruiser, and Dollar was actually detailing it in the driveway of my rental when the radio crackled to life, alerting me to a new call. My first solo call. Car 78, come in. Over. Dispatch, this is 78. Over. Car 78, we have received several calls about noises and commotion at the Primrose Cemetery. I need you to roll out and investigate. Ride and report. Oh, and congratulations on making the force. Over. I anxiously backed my boat of a cruiser out of my driveway and started the 20-mile drive to the cemetery. The roads were empty for a Saturday morning, so the trip didn't take as long as it otherwise would have. When I got within sight of the cemetery, I stopped and listened to the sound of the place. I could hear some people talking and laughing, as well as what sounded like rocks rubbing together. Big rocks. That deep rumbling sound, with accents of bass and trailings of total what the actual fuck sounds. I proceeded to drive up the gravel driveway to the gate that lead to the graves. I exited my car and started to look around. I noticed that someone had brought a fold-away card table into the cemetery, and that the table had been set up in front of a large and very old headstone. I walked closer to inspect. I began to notice things as I approached, like the candles melted onto the table and the Ouija board that was also on the table. I called out, hoping to garner the attention of whoever was there. "Hello, County Sheriff's Department. I need to talk to you. Can you please step out?" I was greeted with silence. I thought maybe I heard a small chuckle from somewhere in the cemetery, but I was not sure. The sounds of rocks rumbling together intensified as I walked further into the cemetery. Again, I announced myself, as I was trained to do. As I tried to communicate with whoever was up there, I started to get a feeling of impending doom. Y'all know that feeling, right? That feeling that something bad, really bad, is getting ready to happen. There is nothing you can do to abate that feeling either. This was not good. I knew things were about to go shit show sideways, but there was not a fucking thing I could do about it. I drew my service weapon and swept the nearby areas for activity. I wasn't able to see anyone, but I did get a feeling that I was being watched. I decided to walk toward the back of the graveyard, where the oldest graves were. I stopped under the large willow tree in the shade and scanned my surroundings. I was now starting to have cold sweats and was feeling an intense vertigo. I stumbled into the sunlight again and walked to the southeast corner of the place. Oh my God. What? The actual fuck duck. There was something in, on, under, and through the cast iron fence in this back corner. I didn't immediately recognize what I was seeing, so I had to approach and inspect the situation. I wish I hadn't. I still think this whole scenario is what opened me up to the rest of the wild and crazy shit that happened to me while I was an officer. I was about 3 feet from the fence when the smell got me. The smell of someone's insides being outside. It's an awful scent, and one that you will never forget. I had been with a senior officer when we found a body that had been through a hay baler, so I knew that scent. I walked closer, careful to not step on any evidence. That is when I realized what I was seeing. Someone, or multiple someones, had been flipped inside out and slammed against the cast iron fence. Their clothing in tatters mixed in with the bits of bone and tangled meat that was, at one point, a human body. Bits of bone and teeth speckled the mess like stars in the night sky. I did not see a single piece of bone bigger than an inch long and inch wide. Something had nearly pulverized these people, or this person. I decided that, since I had not yet received my portable radio, I would walk the perimeter to search for survivors or clues as I made my way to the car to radio back to dispatch. On my short journey, I discovered 3 more scenes of gore, one in each cardinal direction from the center of the cemetery, each as disturbing and disgusting as the first. I finally made my way to the car and called in for the coroner, but was told, "Sorry, 78, the coroner won't do graveyard retrievals. He will show up, but he won't cross into the cemetery. Says he sees enough death without visiting its home, so You'll be Great. Send some barrels. There is not much left. I will also need some evidence bags. Dispatch agreed, and all was silent again. I remembered the table and the board, so that's where I went. I noticed there was a sheet of paper there with some words written on it. From memory, I can only remember some, but they should be enough to fill in the gaps and answer some of your questions. Food, death, hate, race, filth, die, not. Welcome, danger, leave, peace, not here, death awaits. I was of the mind the people playing with the board had written that list of words they got from the board. I know that a lot of people will refuse to believe that those things work, but they do. They are dangerous, especially if not used right. Even an idiot knows that using one in a graveyard is dangerous. See, Ouija boards aren't inherently good or evil. They have no filter that selects only good or neutral spirits. They will communicate to any and all spirits around. As in, they talk to everything. Sometimes all an evil entity needs to cross over to our world is a little attention. Cemeteries are powerful places. Add kids and a Ouija, and you have a recipe for death and disaster. The coroner arrived shortly after I radioed in, and as I scraped and shoveled up each scene, he began to tell me a little history of the cemetery. The oldest grave here doesn't even have a stone. It is an unmarked grave, containing an evil, nasty man-child. Theodore Du Bois was a plantation owner in the county, back before it was the county. When this area was still unclaimed, it was home to all types of nasty people. Outlaws, murderers, and people suspected of witchcraft. Teddy there, well, he was a little bit of all three. He had been chased out of the Northern Territories and settled here after he discovered the unique properties of the land around here. In the early 1800s, he stared to sell his services as an outland magician. He claimed to have a direct connection to black magic and sold his spells and curses to others as evil as himself. In the year 1824, Teddy here sold a curse to a man. The man had his eyes on a holy man's daughter, but the young lady wanted nothing to do with him. Theodore sold the man a hex or whatever, and eventually shit got wild. The preacher died in his sleep. The money he had saved up was never found. The livestock died, and the well dried up. The poor girl had nothing left. Before she would be with a man like that, she took her own life. After her suicide, the man who bought the curse got angry, blamed old Theo here over the death of his crush, came after him one night during a storm, wound up getting himself killed, but enough people were talking now that a lynch mob formed, and they strung the witch man up from a willow tree. The coroner pointed at the willow in the cemetery and continued, "This used to be his yard." That flat spot there was his plantation. The townsfolk left the body in the tree for a week before just digging a hole and cutting the rope, allowing him to drop into his new home. They decided to not honor the man with a memory, and the only place his name is listed is in the court records as a way to keep from digging him up while burying someone. People have claimed he haunts the cemetery here, and since the cast iron fence closes the place off, he can't get out without a body. Unfortunately for him, he can't take a body from an unwilling host. So this happens. He tried to take one by force, and the body is destroyed. So, you're telling me ghosts did this? I asked. No, I am telling you a very dark and very evil entity did this. It hasn't been the first time, and it will probably not be the last. As long as kids come here to play with those damned spirit boards, they will keep dying. I managed to clean the remaining scene, while the coroner droned on about the dark practices that have happened here, and how the area is a hotbed for otherworldly beings and happenings. He then told me that, if I was lucky, they would leave me alone, but he believed this was an omen. So, that's how I came to understand just how big of a bad idea it is to play with a talking board in graveyard. I cleaned those kids out of the fence, and we couldn't identify them from what was left. We had to wait for their parents to report them missing. When they did report them as missing, the entire police force was disturbed to learn there had only been two teenagers, a boy of 17 and a young woman of 19, had been going around and playing with his Ouija board in all the local spooky places, including cemeteries. That thing, or something, tore those two kids into 4 messes. Please, folks, don't use a Ouija anywhere, let alone in a cemetery. Today's tale was going to be about the finger plants we were cursed with in a tobacco crop. They never grew beyond fingers, so it's different than what transpired at that remote gas station, but similar enough that I was worried about posting it, because people may get offended or think I was trying to copy the popular gas station tales, which I am not. So, should I post the finger plant story, or just find another tale to tell?